Slug It, written by Charles Bran, narrated by Larissa Thompson. Chapter 8. "Finally," Val said by way of greeting. Her voice was a bit staticky. The cell service in Dover wasn't good. I glanced out of the windshield at the gas station convenience store in front of me. I hadn't wanted to linger at Doberman's place any longer than I had to, so I'd driven down the block and across the street. I was still feeling a bit dejected by how badly I had screwed up, so I hadn't bothered to go inside and buy a coffee. Besides, I had to save money. I had just wasted $10. "You've been running around campus all this time?" Val asked. "Yeah," I said. "Sorry I didn't get back to you sooner." Val laughed, a warm, carefree laugh. I felt confused. Wasn't she worried about Zev? "Don't worry about it," Val said. "You're panicked over nothing." "What?" "Zev is fine." "What?" "He took off for Worcester." "What? But are you sure?" Val laughed lightly again. "I'm sure. He's off work for the next week for it." "For what?" "A family thing." "What? What thing?" "Look, I shouldn't even be telling you that much, but trust me, he's fine." "You talked to him?" Val laughed again. "Don't be so paranoid, Elle," she said. "No, I haven't talked to him. But I'm sure we would have heard something if his mother tried to pick him up last night and he wasn't there." "But what if she didn't come?" "Did you read the story? Every student was accounted for," Val said. 2 were injured, but that's it." "Oh," I said, feeling stupid. I see." I had read the story, of course, but I didn't want to admit to Val how foolish I'd been. I had convinced myself that the authorities hadn't really checked to see that each and every student who lived at Northside had been accounted for. But of course they had. They had the list, and it was the obvious thing to do. What had really worried me had been what Mel had told me, but she had been distraught herself. Her mind must have exaggerated the details. The masked man probably hadn't been masked at all, just pressing a black shirt against his mouth to avoid inhaling too much smoke. Mel herself had passed out from smoke inhalation after all. The man Mel had seen had been carrying Zev to safety. Of course it hadn't been someone who wanted to hurt him. Mel was scared, and her worries had gotten exaggerated when she passed out and woke up to find that Zev wasn't around. It was still alarming not knowing who it was who had saved Zev, or why he had needed someone to carry him out of the burning building. But Zev's mother had come to pick him up last night, and after seeing that his dorm had burned down, Zev's mom definitely would have talked to the cops if she couldn't find him. So Zev was fine. Burke was an asshole for not telling me why he had dismissed Mel's report, but at least now I knew that Zev was okay. I leaned back against the seat of the van and felt the knot of tension in my shoulders starting to slacken. It sounded likely that Zev had a death in the family, or maybe one of his parents was in the hospital or something. Val was being evasive to protect his privacy, but that's what a family thing had to be, right? That would explain why Zev had taken off so suddenly without any advance notice. And it also explained why he had been missing from his English class. A family member in the hospital or a funeral would count as an excused absence, no matter how otherwise strict the attendance policy was. Val laughed, and the sound of it made my cheeks heat up. "You sound like you need to get some rest," she said. Yeah," I said. "I didn't sleep well last night." "It's all right," Val said, chuckling. I felt my face burning. It had been a bad last couple of hours for that. My cheeks got even hotter when I realized that I had texted Zev dozens of times. He probably hadn't seen them because his phone had been destroyed in the fire. He had been carried out of the building, so he wouldn't have had a chance to save any of his possessions. And those texts were in the cloud, waiting for him to get a new phone. My face felt like it was on fire. I had been so stupid, getting so worked up over nothing. But was it nothing? I still didn't know what had happened that night. You do know. You just don't want to admit that you got drunk. No, I thought. I didn't get drunk. I know I wouldn't do that. Why was part of my mind so fixed on that idea? Does it matter? Now that you know Zev is fine, you can just forget about that night. I couldn't just forget about not knowing what had happened to me that night. I had to know. Just forget about it. You know you want to. Sure, it sounded nice. Just forget about everything and move on. But I didn't think I could actually do that. The possibility that I really had gone on some kind of drunken bender would haunt me until I could nail down the details of what had happened. I couldn't just let it go. Even though I still felt agitated, learning that Zev was all right was like a weight that had been pressed against my chest had been lifted. Wait, I said. What about those stories he was working on, the ones I sent you? Elle, Val said. How badly did you sleep last night? I blinked. I said. Come on, Val said. This woman is taking Zev for a ride. I mean, you read that first article, right? The one about her magic act? Yeah? Did you read the part where she says she has magical powers? Yeah. Elle, she's a nut. There's no conspiracy, just a crazy lady. I blinked. I hadn't thought of that. With everything that had been going on, and the way Burke had treated me, but then again, Burke had a grudge against me. People like that latch onto reporters sometimes, Val said. That's all it is. When Zev gets back, I'll help him deal with her. But are you sure? I'm sure the only reason she had Zev convinced is because he saw her in her underwear, Val said. Not enough blood in his brain, if you know what I mean. God, I hope he didn't sleep with her. Yeah. I was dumbstruck and at a loss for words. What Val was saying did make a lot of sense. I couldn't believe that I had been caught up in imagining some vast conspiracy in Riverside. This was a town with more frequent baking competitions than homicides. Val was right. Of course she was. Angela Miller had started her conversations with Zev by stripping down to her underwear and claiming to have magical powers. What was more likely, a vast conspiracy or one nutty woman whose overt sexuality had thrown Zev's faculties out the window? I was just thrown for a loop myself and entertaining conspiracy theories because I still didn't know why I had blacked out. It was deeply disturbing not knowing exactly what had happened last night, and it wasn't something I was used to. It was an immense relief that Zev was okay, but it didn't help fill in the details of what had happened to me that night. God, I hoped I hadn't been drinking. Could it have been smoke inhalation? I hadn't been inside when the fire started like Mel had been, but I had been standing outside. Maybe I had passed out and fallen over, hitting my head on something, a tree branch or a rock. Could the combination of smoke inhalation and a minor head injury cause short-term memory loss? Val interrupted my thoughts. Relax, Elle, Val said. Get some sleep. You've just had a scare, all right? I'm okay, I said. This is a crazy business to work in sometimes. It can mess with your head, so take the afternoon off, okay? Get some rest. Yeah, I said. I'm all right, really. I wanted to let you know what I found. You did the right thing, Val said, but there's no need to get so worried. This is Riverside, Elle. Yeah, I said. I know, Thanks. Just take it easy today. Maybe tomorrow you can help me cover Dover and Auburn while Zev's gone. Yeah, I said. You got it. All right, Val said. Rest up. I need you sharp tomorrow. Right, I said. I finished the call and set down my phone before leaning back into the driver's seat with a sigh. I really had let myself get carried away, hadn't I? But I didn't feel satisfied for some reason. I still had this lingering feeling that something didn't add up. And it wasn't just the fact that I still couldn't remember everything that had happened the previous night. Why had Angela Miller abruptly disappeared? It just seemed too easy to chalk it all up to she's crazy. Even if she was crazy, there should be some kind of logic to her behavior. She had to have reasons for why she was doing what she was doing, even if those reasons didn't make much sense. If what she wanted was attention, why would she have run off? And why had that redhead with the ribbon outfit been so scared when I'd mentioned her name? But I'd never interacted with Angela Miller myself. Zev had. And Zev had every reason to be willfully blind about what she was telling him. He was desperate for a big break. That's when I put my finger on another thing that was still bothering me. The memory of Zev's voice, shouting out for help from the forest. Had that just been a dream? Had Zev been with me at all that night? I started cracking my knuckles idly, one by one. It just didn't make any sense. And I still didn't know if I had gotten drunk. That part was disturbing me most of all. I didn't want to believe it was even possible. It had been easy to get carried away in a crazy conspiracy theory. It was something to think about apart from the awful situation I was in. I was homeless. And on top of that, I didn't like the direction the newspaper was going, so my career felt uncertain too. So far today, I had eaten fast food for every meal, but I couldn't keep that up. I had to start saving so that I could afford rent. And I already knew how expensive Riverside was. That was why I had been living in Mel's dorm room in the first place. I could call my father and tell him what had happened, ask him for help, for money, just enough to help make ends meet until Mel could graduate and move in with me again. No, I hated that idea. I didn't want to tell my father that I was failing to provide for myself. It really was easier chasing a grand conspiracy than thinking about the crappy situation I was in. The situation I had put myself in when I had picked this college, this major, this job. I hadn't caused the fire, but I had made all those other choices. No, the fire was your fault. I blinked. Where had that thought come from? It didn't make any sense. I brushed it aside. I had bigger things to worry about. Was it too late to change my mind about the offer Lockwood had given me? Could I do something like that? Ugh. I'd rather get a second job flipping burgers than spend my time sucking up to business owners, talking to them about how to best reflect their brand. But maybe that was what I was going to have to do. It might be the only path forward at this point. Maybe I should have majored in something more practical like Mel had. I slammed my fist against the back of the passenger seat next to me, and then let my hand drop onto the armrest. My phone rang. It was Mel. I should tell her that Zev was okay. I answered the phone. "Hey," I said. "What?" "Congratulations! Yeah, I can meet you there." Chapter 9. "To the award winner," I said, raising my glass of root beer. Mel looked away from me shyly. "It's not that big a deal," she said. "You said they only give one of these awards each year, right?" I said. "I think that means you're the best finance major in the whole graduating class." Mel smiled, but didn't say anything. I could tell she was proud of herself, and she deserved it. "Well, you had a pretty crazy afternoon yourself," Mel said. She giggled into her straw and accidentally blew a bubble into her soda. Her bright orange shirt sparred with the vibrant orange vinyl upholstery of the booth she was sitting in, both colors competing for the title of most eye-melting color to be assaulted by while enjoying the best burger in town. Caldwell's Cavern was kind on the stomach, but rough on the eyes. The family-owned restaurant had amazing American cuisine, red pinstripe walls, and tacky knickknacks nailed to every surface available, including the ceiling. "You really went into a strip club?" I shrugged. "I told you, I kinda got carried away," I said. I felt my face starting to flush again. Mel laughed. I wish I could have been there, she said. Look, I didn't even see any, parts, I lied. The sight of that naked blonde woman came back into my head as I poked another French fry into my milkshake with a little too much force, breaking it in half. Mel grinned. Sure you didn't, she said. I felt my face getting warmer. Anyway, how's the roommate situation? Hell, Mel admitted. I can't wait for the end of the semester. How was the couch? What? You said you were staying with a coworker, Mel said. Yeah, I said. It's fine. Mel frowned. Eliza, she began. How's the hand? I interrupted quickly. It actually still really hurts, Mel said, but I could tell that Mel was about to continue pressing me about my living situation, so I interrupted her again. Geez, I said, did that cream they gave you help at all? Mel shook her head at me, exasperated. Quit trying to change the subject, she said, digging into her purse. I saw what she was doing, and I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out my wallet. I wasn't going to let Mel pick up the check. In fact, I wanted to offer to pay for Mel's food too, since she was the one who had something to celebrate tonight. I hadn't completely drained my savings account when I had to buy clothes and toiletries. And I had come up with a plan that would give me some extra spending money. If I just lived in the van for the next 2 months, I would be saving on rent, even more than when I had been staying with Mel. For the next 2 months, I'd have money to spare. Mel eyed my wallet as she pulled a white envelope out of her purse. You can put that away, she said. The waitress came by with the check while you were in the bathroom. Hey, I said, that's not fair. Did you miss the part where I told you they gave me a gift card with the award? I guess I missed that. But you should spend that on yourself. Mel shook her head exasperatedly. I'm not the one living in a van, she said. I'm not living in the van, I said. And technically, last night I had slept at the Sentinel. I hadn't actually spent the night in the van yet, although that was what I was planning for tonight. You're a terrible liar, Mel said, scowling. I bit my lip. Okay, I said. Last night I really did sleep on a couch, but going forward, I just think I can save some money. You really should get on a payment plan for your student loans, Mel said. I can help you with that. Please. I frowned. Mel had tried to talk me into this before, but when I had pressed her, she had admitted that if I went along with it, I might end up having to pay an extra $50,000 of interest in the end. A lower monthly payment sounded good, sure, but that's how they get you. I folded my arms in front of me. I knew that there was no way I was going to budge on this, but I also didn't want to make Mel worry. A moment of silence hung in the air between us as I tried to think about how to explain to Mel that sleeping in the van wouldn't be as inconvenient or dangerous as she was imagining. Mel sighed. Then she passed the envelope across the table to me. Here, she said. I picked up the envelope and frowned at it. Take a look, Mel said. I can explain if you need me to. I opened the envelope, drew out the piece of paper that was inside, and unfolded it. A check fell out and onto the table. A check with a fairly large number written on it. I glared at Mel. I don't need your help, I said. Mel sighed again. It's your money, Elle. She got up and walked over to me and started pointing at the piece of paper, which had a column of numbers next to a column of text. What is this, an invoice? I asked. It's a breakdown of your share of the money I've gotten back from the university and the renter's insurance policy, Mel said. We had insurance? Elle, we talked about this at the beginning of the semester. Oh, right, I thought. When I had asked her how much I was going to owe her in rent each month, Mel had mentioned that she wanted a few extra bucks for some kind of insurance. It really was a sweetheart deal for me to live with her, so I hadn't been concerned or paid much attention. I was impressed that Mel had gotten money from the insurance company so quickly. I had always thought they really dragged their feet when it was time to give money back to you, and the fire had just happened last night. Mel must have really known how to squeeze the system. I looked at another line on the piece of paper. Parking permit? What's this? It's a refund, Mel said. My new dorm doesn't have a parking lot. Mel didn't have a car, but she had bought a parking pass for the van on my behalf. Fortunately, the university hadn't discovered that she was not the actual owner of the vehicle in question. They refunded the fee for the whole year? I said, incredulous. I was suspicious Mel was trying to slip me some of her own money. They have to shut down the whole lot in front of Northside for demolition and construction, Mel said, so they're really short on spaces. They really wanted to get as many displaced students to store their cars off campus as possible, so they offered a full refund. This is a lot of money, I said. You're not trying to give me more than my fair share, are you? I stared into Mel's eyes as I put the question to her, carefully looking for any sign of deception. I'm not, Mel said. That's why I printed this off to show you. I continued looking into Mel's eyes, and she looked back into mine, unblinking. I still didn't know how to handle this new Mel, the one who had pantsuits in her closet and could navigate complex paperwork with ease. 2.5 years ago, I had already started working as a reporter while attending classes, and Mel still hadn't decided on her major and was realizing that she wasn't going to graduate in 4 years. I glanced back down at the paper. Even if Mel knew I wouldn't accept charity from her, she was still taking care of me by getting the insurance money and the parking pass refund. I wouldn't have known how to do any of that. I wouldn't even have thought of it. It was hard for me to accept that our relationship had changed. I looked up from the paper and back into Mel's eyes. She didn't flinch. She knew me. She knew I didn't like asking for help from anybody. But she wasn't backing down. Mel had found a way to help me get money that, technically, was mine. But Mel was still the one who had gotten it for me. Thanks, I mumbled. I cleared my throat and tried to speak again, louder this time. I looked her in the eyes, trying to convey my sincerity. Thank you, Mel, I said. I can't believe you've already taken care of all of this. You work fast. I'm worried about you, Mel said. I'll be fine, I said. I got by okay last night. Is that why you have those big bags under your eyes? I shrugged and looked away from her. Have you even looked into short-term rentals? Mel asked. Well, no, I said. I mean, it's possible I could be out of a job soon. What? I sighed and explained to her the situation at the paper with Lockwood and what Zev had told me about the likelihood of downsizing. Geez, Ellie, she said. You know, I hear there's a good temp agency on Main Street. I shook my head. Mel just didn't understand the appeal of being a reporter, probably because I told her all the horror stories. I don't know for sure if I'll be affected, I said. I think I should try to pad out my savings account as much as I can. Mel gave me a sympathetic look. I get that, she said, but I just don't think living out of a van is safe. Come on, what do you think is going to happen? You're all alone, and I've got pepper spray in the glove box, I said, rolling my eyes. And Riverside is not that dangerous. There aren't axe murderers lurking on every street corner, you know. Mel massaged her temples, looking very frustrated. There's no mini fridge in the van, she said. There's no microwave. Your rice cooker is gone. How are you going to eat? I'll be saving a lot of money, I said. I can afford fast food. For every meal, Mel said. I could tell from her tone of voice what she was thinking. I wasn't the most sensitive person, but I had been around Mel long enough to become aware that she was secretly jealous of the fact that I was skinnier than she was. She tried not to let it show, but I could tell that Mel resented the fact that I never counted calories or went on crash diets like she did, and still never gained weight. Somehow, the fact that Mel was obviously attractive and had no problem getting dates didn't seem to matter. It was ridiculous that Mel should be jealous of me, of all people, with my huge, protruding schnoz. I'll still get my vegetables, Mom, I said. Mel snorted out a little laugh, and I felt relieved. I had made it around the landmine. But then Mel said, "Fries do not count as a vegetable." "I know that," I said defensively. I was getting a little annoyed at being treated like a child. "They sell salads." "Fast food salads are not healthy. They hide a ton of sugar in there," Mel said. Then she sighed and added, "You're so lucky." I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. I hated these conversations. It wasn't like I didn't try to take care of myself. Sure, I never counted calories, but I tried to exercise and eat right because I knew from experience that I'd feel sluggish and moody if I didn't. And I really, really hated it when Mel acted like all that mattered was the numbers on the scale. Why couldn't she see that she looked great, regardless of whether or not she'd been dieting recently? Or that I'd never look anywhere near as good as she did? A few pounds wouldn't change the fact that she was attractive and I just wasn't. Mel must have seen that I was upset from my expression. "I'm not trying to baby you," she said, "but have you even thought about where you're going to park your van overnight?" I sighed. I figured I'd park at the, All right, I thought. My parking pass was canceled. But I didn't want Mel to feel guilty or worried, so I quickly came up with a lie. "At the Sentinel." Luckily, I hadn't told Mel about how I'd gotten in trouble with Lockwood for staying there last night. "That's downtown," Mel said. "It's in a safe neighborhood," I said, "and there are security cameras." "Are you listening to yourself? Why do you think they need those cameras?" I crossed my arms in front of me. It was time to end this conversation. "I can take care of myself," I said firmly. Mel sighed and pulled out her smartphone. "You can rent a room for less than you might think," she said. "Will you at least look at some listings with me?" I glared at Mel. I wanted to tell her to mind her own business, but that was when I realized what I was feeling and why. I was still angry with her, and it wasn't because she kept worrying about me. It was because she had said she thought I was lucky not having to worry about my diet as much as she did. It bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I couldn't believe Mel could be so blind to the fact that she had something that part of me deeply wanted, the sort of beauty that made heads turn to stare at her. Men looked at Mel every time we went out in public. I saw them doing it. Strangers constantly stealing glances at her, at the generous curves of her body and the smooth oval shape of her face, her full lips, her cute little nose. Guys were always flirting with her, but their eyes always either slid past me or, worse, fixed on the giant beak sticking out of my face. But that wasn't Mel's fault. I stopped glaring at her and looked down at the table in shame. I was being an asshole, making everything about myself. Even though I knew Mel was beautiful and was jealous of the attention she got, things could be rough out there for women like her. I had seen Mel's frustration when she had fallen in love with a dress she had found online and was about to order it before discovering that it didn't come in a size big enough to fit her. I had seen her hating herself when she quit one of her crash diets because it was leaving her too hungry and lightheaded to concentrate on her classes. Mel was constantly struggling to feel beautiful. But I was just thinking about how it made me feel when she said something self-effacing. I was a horrible friend, so concerned with how I felt about my own appearance that I had been glaring at someone who had done nothing but express concern about me and my welfare. Not only that, but Mel had bought me dinner, and that had been after she had gone to a lot of effort to wrangle up some money for me. And Mel had done all this for me in spite of the fact that the reason we had gone out for dinner in the first place had been to celebrate her achievement. I wanted to apologize to her, but I couldn't really do that without admitting to thoughts I didn't want her to know about. What I could do was let her show me the listings like she was asking. And even though I was feeling confident that I could make living out of the van work, after all, it was only a couple of months, there was no harm in looking. After everything Mel had done for me, I owed her that much. "All right," I said, letting out a breath. "Show me." The mood lightened up quickly as Mel started showing me some listings. I was surprised to see that you could get a furnished room in a house for only $500 a month. Granted, I was pretty sure that back home in Indiana you could get a whole apartment for that, but, well, it was Riverside. And I could at least humor my friend a little while I finished the rest of my milkshake. "What about that one?" I said. "Only $300 a month." "I think it's a scam," Mel said. She clicked on it. "See, $50 application fee. They just want to pocket the money." "Ah," I said. "Wait, what about that one? Female roommate wanted only $200 a month?" "I really think the ones I showed you earlier." "Let's just look." "All right." "Must be between the ages of 18 and 26. Shared spaces are to be clothing optional?" We shared a look of horror mixed with amusement. "I told you," Mel said. "All the good ones are at least $5.50. Eventually, my milkshake was gone, and Mel's plate was clean. I didn't make any promises to her, but Mel seemed satisfied just by getting me to admit that some of the listings looked decent. She knew me well enough to know that if I changed my mind and decided to go through with a rental, it would only be after I had some time to think it over. Finally, we started making our way out of the restaurant, stepping carefully to avoid a garden gnome that had been welded to the floor next to the server's station. A harvest moon was rising, huge along the tree line as we stepped into the parking lot. New England was showing the schizophrenic side of its weather. Despite the fact that last night had dropped near freezing, tonight the air was thick and muggy. Sweat was already beading on the back of my neck. "Ugh, gonna be one of those summers," I said. "Looks like," Mel said. "Where should I drop you off?" "The library," Mel said. "If I try to study in my new room, I might kick off a civil war." We walked past a few rows of empty spaces to the edge of the parking lot. I had a habit of leaving the van at the back of parking lots, because maneuvering that behemoth out of a spot could be a pain if other cars parked too close. Mel walked over to wait by the door that led to the passenger seat. That side of the van was lit up by the streetlights, but the driver's side sat behind the van's shadow, which stretched from the edge of the parking lot and out into the tiny patch of grass that stood between the parking lot and the dark forest behind the restaurant. The warmth of the night meant that the crickets were out in force, filling the air with a loud, eerie keening. I had no reason to be nervous about walking over to the dark side of the van to step into the driver's seat, but I felt a little wary as I stepped out of the light. Maybe I sensed what was waiting for me. I stopped short when I saw a silhouette in the darkness, a tall man leaning against the driver's side of the van with an unlit cigarette sticking out of his mouth. The man didn't react to me. He just kept leaning against the van, staring up at the moon. My initial fear, no doubt brought on by the eerie cricket sounds, was replaced by irritation. "Hey, that's my van you're leaning on." The man remained where he was, slumped against the door. "Then I've come to the right place," he drawled with a deep voice that had a southern accent so thick and heavy you could probably marinate a barbecue in it. Gangly arms stuck out of his denim jacket, worn underneath an actual black cowboy hat that was punctuated with a silver star above the man's forehead. His face was shadowed under the hat, but his chin stuck out like a knife blade. A greasy-looking blonde ponytail slithered out from behind the brim of his ridiculous head apparel. "Don't tell me you've forgotten me," the man said. "What?" I answered, tense and confused. My knuckles cracked, and I forced myself to loosen my fists. I had to relax. I was nervous, but I didn't want to look like I was asking for a fight. If this guy was dangerous, I needed to be careful not to antagonize him. "It's only been a few months since Sam Hain," the man said. The memory came roaring back. Reuben Chalmers was a man I had interviewed at the Winter Wiccan Festival in the park. He had seemed a bit, well, the polite way of saying it was eccentric. Chalmers was a man who clearly didn't have a strong grasp on social conventions, but he hadn't seemed dangerous. For all I knew, he might have thought hanging around my van was a reasonable way to get in touch with me. Maybe he had a story. "Right," I said. "The festival. I remember your hat. I told you then." Chalmers said. "I always wear it. Ain't no costume I put on to sell charms." I wasn't sure how to react to that, or to the man in general. Chalmers was clearly putting on a persona, wearing strange clothing, claiming to believe in magic. And he was also still leaning against my van, putting himself in my way if I wanted to leave. His whole shtick struck me as fake. But if he did have a story for me, I could try to keep from rolling my eyes. "Sure is funny you don't remember me," Chalmers said, his tone irritated. He pulled the unlit cigarette from his mouth and tossed it to the ground. That was enough to put me on edge again. Chalmers was walking the line between quirky but harmless and scary and threatening. And he was edging closer to the dangerous side of that line. I suddenly felt very aware of the fact that I couldn't see one of Chalmers's hands hiding inside his denim jacket. For all I knew, he could be holding a knife. Or a gun. I heard Mel's steps against the pavement behind me. She was walking towards us to see what was going on. Whatever I did, I had to make sure I kept her safe too. "1 second, Mr. Chalmers," I said, keeping my voice calm. I sidled back toward Mel and whispered in her ear, "Stay back." Chalmers spread his lips in a toothy grin. "Girl ain't got nothing to be afraid of," the man in the black hat said. "This is 'tween you and me." That set off even more alarm bells. I whipped my head away from Mel and fixed my eyes on Chalmers. He had straightened up, no longer leaning against the van, but he was still standing in front of the driver's side door. I heard Mel shuffling around in her purse. She pressed something into my hand and then stepped back. I glanced down at it, a canister of pepper spray, and then fixed my eyes back on Chalmers. The gangly man looked at the spray in my hand and whistled. "You don't want to use that," he drawled. "You'd regret it." That sounded like a threat, and it was enough to make my heartbeat kick into overdrive. I gripped the pepper spray hard, with my thumb on the trigger. If Chalmers made any sudden movements, I had to be prepared to hit him with it. And that was when it happened. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. With his left hand, Chalmers reached down and slipped his fingers under the van's undercarriage, and then he lifted the side of the vehicle up 6 inches, his expression placid, like it was nothing. I didn't move. I didn't blink. It was absurd what my eyes were showing me, but they just kept on showing it. Chalmers held the van up as he stared at me. The front and rear tires on the driver's side were hanging in the air. I just stood there, staring at him. This gangly man was no bodybuilder. He was stronger than he looked. Impossibly strong. He wasn't even positioning himself such that he had a good grip or any kind of leverage. He was lifting the van as easily as if it were made out of paper. Chalmers's gaze was fixed on me as he slowly lowered the van back to the pavement. He let the tires fall the last half of an inch, and the aging shocks let out a screeching sound. I flinched and took a step back. Sweat was beading on my forehead. I suddenly wanted very badly to turn and run down the road, not stopping until I was sure I had gotten away. This was impossible. It had to be some kind of trick, a carnival stunt or something. Chalmers looked very much like the sort of person who might perform in a carnival. The lanky man took 1 long-legged step toward me. I took 2 steps back, my legs moving before I knew what had happened. I heard a metal clink and glanced down at the ground for a split second before my eyes snapped back to Chalmers. I had dropped the pepper spray. I couldn't breathe. I felt like my heart was going to tear its way out of my chest. I wanted to start screaming and to run away as fast as I could, but I couldn't move. "Scared you, didn't I?" Chalmers said, dropping his voice into a whisper. My lungs were burning with lack of air, but my chest was paralyzed, refusing to allow itself to move enough for me to get a deep breath. My eyes were burning, but I couldn't blink. "I came to deliver a message. You don't know what you're messing with," Chalmers said. My hand was shaking. If I needed to, could I dive to the ground and grab the pepper spray? So stop asking questions about Angela." With that, the lanky man tipped his hat and turned to walk away, straight into the trees behind the parking lot, weaving his way through the bushes without concern. I stood frozen, not daring to move a muscle until Chalmers disappeared into the darkness. The underbrush was so thick that it didn't take more than a few seconds until the man was completely concealed, and all that was left was the crunching, scraping sounds of the trees and bushes as he cut his way through. The wind picked up, blustering across the trees, filling the air with a rustling sound. When the wind died, the sound of Reuben Chalmers was gone too. I had never realized how quickly someone could fade from sight walking into the forest. There were stretches of woods practically everywhere outside of downtown Riverside. Anything could be hiding in that undergrowth. Someone could jump out of the forest just as fast as Reuben Chalmers had disappeared into it. Someone with a knife. Or a gun. A voice in my ear made me jump. "Ellie?" Mel said. Her voice sounded weird. I turned to face her. Mel was grinning at me from where she stood a couple of feet back. Her cheeks were flushed. "Who was that creep?" Mel asked. She was slurring the words together and leaning against the side of the van, as though she wasn't sure she could stay on her feet. "Mel?" I said. "Are you okay?" Mel laughed. "I'm wasted," she said. "I thought I saw that guy lift up that big old van with one hand." Mel staggered and fell to one knee. I rushed over to her, grabbing her just in time to help her get her hair out of her face as she started puking onto the asphalt. Mel heaved once, and then again. She groaned. "I knew I shouldn't have had that second cocktail." Mel had ordered a cocktail? I hadn't noticed. No, she definitely did. You just weren't paying attention. That was weird. I could have sworn Mel had been drinking soda. Maybe you're drunk too. And with that thought came a sudden wave of dizziness. I felt my stomach lurching. But it didn't make any sense. There was no way I would have gotten drunk. I was the one who had driven us here. And besides, after what had happened 2 nights ago, there was no way I was going to have so much as a sip of alcohol. And even though it was strange that I hadn't noticed that Mel had been drinking, I hadn't noticed when she had paid the check with her gift card either. I was just tired and out of it. I'd had a crazy day. And I hadn't slept well last night. And Mel obviously was drunk. There was no denying that, based on how she was acting. It was weird that I hadn't noticed before, but I couldn't argue with the puddle of vomit. I helped Mel to her feet and tried to keep her steady. "Let's get you away from the puke," I said. "I think you need some fresh air." I needed fresh air too. The splatter on the ground was making me feel sick and lightheaded. So lightheaded that, for a moment, I'd almost thought I was drunk myself. But why did I think that, even for a moment? It was ridiculous. I was being paranoid. Probably because I still didn't know exactly what had happened to me the night of the fire. "That guy was creepy," Mel said. She seemed a bit steadier now. Maybe the vomiting was helping her sober up. Alcohol could be like that with her. It hit her all at once and then passed away almost as quickly. I was pretty sure I had seen her like that once before. I couldn't remember exactly when, but it seemed familiar. "Yeah, he was creepy," I said, "and I thought I saw him lift the van, too." "What? He really did that?" "No," I said. "I mean, that would be impossible." "I thought you said you saw it, too." "I think it was, like," I chuckled. "I think that guy just tried to threaten me with some kind of magic trick." "No way. Did he juggle knives?" No," I said, laughing again. "It must have been some kind of optical illusion." "Optical what?" "Don't worry about him. He's gone now." But the image of the van's wheels hanging in the air came back to me, along with a disturbing, panicked feeling. Thinking about that image made me feel like tearing my hair out with fear. That guy had terrified me. I had thought he was about to attack me. Something was seriously wrong with his mind. You didn't see what you thought you saw. You were scared. No, you did see it. You know that, don't you? And you know what happened the night Northside burned down. A wave of nausea and dizziness broke over me, and then a sudden, searing pain lashed across my left eye, so intense I let out a gasp and reached up to put my hand over the left side of my face. "Eliza, are you okay?" Mel's voice snapped me out of the trance. The burning sensation vanished, along with the rumbling in my stomach. I realized that I was breathing hard, hyperventilating. That was why I felt so lightheaded. I knew now that Chalmers had scared me more than I'd thought. He had scared me so badly that I had experienced a panic attack as my mind began exaggerating the details of our encounter. It made sense. I was homeless, low on sleep, and had spent the past 2 days seriously worried about Zev. This must be how Mel had felt when she had been convinced that a huge man in a ski mask had carried Zev out of the burning building and into the woods. Your mind plays tricks on you when you're afraid. I'd heard that before, and now that I'd experienced it for myself, I knew how true it could be. Chalmers couldn't have really lifted up the van. He must have just rocked it on its shocks, but that was hardly an impressive display of strength. I could do that. It was just the context that made it seem so intimidating, the threatening manner, and the fact that he was touching my property without my permission. "Eliza?" "Yeah, I'm fine," I said. "Feeling up to getting into the van?" Mel nodded. I grabbed Mel by the wrist to make sure I could keep her steady as I helped her into the passenger seat. To my surprise, she walked over to it just fine, nimbly stepping over the puddle of vomit and keeping her shoes clean. After I got Mel seated, I stepped up into the van in front of her and awkwardly climbed over her and into the driver's seat. Mel didn't say anything about what I was doing. I think she understood why I hadn't wanted to go back to the driver's side door by myself. Or maybe she was just generally out of it. "Does that happen a lot?" Mel asked. "What?" "People threatening you." "Well," I said, "sometimes they just walk up to me while I'm minding my own business and try to start arguing with me or telling me I suck or that I'm a shill." "Geez, really?" "Just occasionally. But that's not what that guy said?" "No," I said, my chest tightening. He just didn't make sense." I didn't want to worry her. But the fact that Chalmers wanted me to stay away from Anna and to stop asking about Angela Miller made me nervous. Was it possible that Chalmers was some kind of deranged fan of Angela's? Did he know that she was missing? Or was he just a crazed stalker who had heard about me visiting the strip club and felt like I was stealing his girl away from him? A crazy stalker was more plausible than some sort of real conspiracy involving Angela Miller, wasn't it? Chalmers definitely seemed like he had a screw loose. Chalmers had said that he came to deliver a message. Was that just a turn of phrase, or had someone else sent him? Was Chalmers working for Doberman? It was a crazy thought, but Doberman was furious that a reporter had been in his club. More than he should have been. Did he have something to hide? An involvement in prostitution, perhaps? On the other hand, maybe Doberman was just one of those guys who hated the media. There were people like that, people like Buffino. Or maybe it was just what Doberman had said to me, that he didn't want any reporters trying to use the girls at his club for a sexy newspaper article. Maybe Val had been wrong to dismiss Angela Miller as nothing but a nut seeking attention and making up stories. If she was just a nut who had disappeared for no reason, why had that red-headed dancer, Anna, gotten upset and frightened when I had mentioned her? Anna had been acting as if someone had threatened her. And according to Zev's notes, someone had threatened Angela Miller, too. And now a man had tracked me down and threatened me, telling me to stop asking questions about Angela Miller. Chalmers said that I didn't know what I was messing with. So, at least from the perspective of Reuben Chalmers, something was going on in Riverside. Could it be the prostitution and police corruption Zev had started to uncover? Chalmers must have been involved in the sex trade somehow. Maybe as muscle. The criminals involved in prostitution wouldn't want the truth coming out any more than the corrupt official would. It would threaten their business. Eliza? Mel asked. You okay? I had been staring blankly at the steering wheel. Yeah, I said. That guy just startled me, you know? I was just taking a moment. Are you sure you can drive? Yeah, I'm fine. Promise. Oh, good, Mel muttered. She leaned her face against the passenger window. Let's get you to bed, I said. This has been Slug It, written by Charles Bran. Narrated by Larissa Thompson. Copyright 2020 by Charles B. Kreutzkamp. Production copyright 2021 by Charles B. Kreutzkamp.